Hello, my name is Laird, and welcome to an in-depth conversation with Atlanta music critics William Ford and prolific pianist, composer, educator, and new music advocate, Jeffrey Beigel. In this in-depth interview with William, Maestro Biegel reflects on his childhood, training, advocacy for contemporary composers, and extraordinary career. Please welcome your host William Ford, creator of Atlanta music critic, in conversation with Jeffrey Beigel.
Hey there.
Hello there.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you. As I mentioned in my emails, I had talked with Lucas Richmond, and he had happened to mention your name, that he had worked with you on one of his concertos.
Yes.
And also, of course, I've seen your name appear on Slip Disc as, from time to time, commentator. So and of course, you come with such a tremendous reputation and history. It is really nice to be able to sit down and talk with you a bit and learn about how you got to be who you are.
I appreciate that you reached out because, so much of what we do is in the background. Some of it is not necessarily important that everybody should hear all the details of why things end up happening as a result, but it's sometimes nice to know the grassroots and the efforts and the time that goes into making things happen and why, and some of the barriers that we encounter on the way that might scare us away from following our yellow brick road. You never know where that road's going to take you. It's like driving cross country, which I haven't done, but I would imagine it's as though you see exits and there's signs for certain attractions. Could be a farm stand, it could be whatever. Do you get off and take the time to cultivate that exit, or do you just keep going and go with the steady flow and get where you have to get? Or take chances. For me, part of being a musician is not just being able to sit down and play Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, Bach, all the classic repertoire as best as I can, which I do. But I think for me, there's been more to being a musician and more to my role while I'm here to be part of the evolution of it, rather than just being a museum curator, more being a curator for the future. I think that's very important. For me, it's important. For others, it would be, no, it's not my thing. And I find that doing a lot of the new music, you mentioned Lucas Richmond, he's one of the most important composers, let alone being a wonderful person and a friend. He's an important composer because he's contributed so much to repertoire, but his piano concerto is wonderful. And he's a conductor of a high level. And, it's part of, working with living composers. It's actually helped me play music by composers from the past. See them as people more than a bronze bust of a composer's head that's with a wig on it. It brings the humanity of the composer alive to me, even if they're not around. So I interpret the music differently in a way. It becomes more human rather than the notes on the page and loud and soft and put your pedal down and phrasing and very efficient, competent performance. It becomes something much more than that. I really do I feel like I become an actor and I'm putting the composer's hat on and becoming the essence of the composer and the spirit of the composer. And then it's not about me anymore. And all these projects I've done with living composers are not about me. And in part, they're not about the composers either. They've become part of the repertoire and the need for new music to be around so that in the future, there's a wealth of repertoire for pianists to take on.
You have a most interesting background, in part because you were unable to speak and you could not hear for first 3 years of your life?
Basically, was not stone deaf. What I remember that I could give listeners a reasonable explanation of what that experience was like is if you go into a swimming pool and you have a swimming cap on or whatever to cover your ears. And that's what it felt like to hear people speaking underwater. You can't really understand what it is. I had a lot of fluid inside my ear canals and the eardrums were not vibrating efficiently. That's the effect of what I had. And according to my parents, it was, going to doctors. I wasn't speaking at age 3 much except caveman sounds, what I wanted. And they knew that was not normal. And physicians would say, well, he'll grow out of it. They didn't know as much that as they know now, or have the testing that they have now. But one physician faced me to the wall and called my name and talked to me, and I didn't answer. He says, no, your son is not lazy or being, belligerent or anything. He can't hear. And that was what opened the door. The oddest thing of the whole experience was that I remember that sensation. I remember walking down the hallway of the hospital to go to doctor's offices. It may have been actually for the surgery itself. I remember the procedure itself in the operating room, bright white light room with my little body just floating on the ceiling, looking down at the surgeons working inside my mouth. I remember that. And I remember also being in the hospital bed in the room across from the nurse's station. I remember hearing more. I remember being asked questions about rolling on your stomach or your back or whatever. I didn't know the difference. I must have understood what the back and the stomach were. So I was able to hear a little, but it wasn't enough to comprehend. And even to this day, I need to read things more than once. Not the music, no problem. I could sight read music. Anything in English, any written books or materials, I have to read them a few times to comprehend, to connect the dots. And also during that experience, not being able to hear well forced me to use other senses more acutely. Could be what I saw or sensed what was behind me because I couldn't hear. So it became a physical sense of my surroundings, feeling and touch. So other senses became more awakened. But the downside of this story is not being able to hear or speak created a very inhibited bubble. And I had a few friends in school and all. And I went to school. They treated me like a normal kid after the surgery. And I started piano lessons at age 7. And I just ate up all those piano books. I just one after the other after the other. I played by ear when I was 4, 5. And so I had all the lessons and I traveled through my studies with one teacher, then another teacher. And then when I was 16, I went to play for a teacher that became my professor for college, Adele Marcus at Juilliard. And I never told her this story about the hearing handicap. And I probably should have, because it would have made a lot of sense to her, because she used to say things, you're so inhibited, I can't get you to open up. Your pianism is, she used to say, you remind me of Joseph Levine. That was her teacher. She'd say, you remind me of Mr. Levine. You play like him, you look like him, you hunch over the keys like him. And she was comparing me to this pianist. I didn't really know him. And now I think about it and I can't believe she said that. And I see it and I feel it and I know it, what she was talking about. Aside from the fact that she was a very tough teacher and very, very rarely complimented you because she had such a high standard. And if you even came this close to what she expected of you, you did okay. But I was in a bubble. And everything I felt about music was bottled up until finally it slowly started to come out into my late teens and 20s. I was 21. I was playing Prokofiev's Second Concerto. Things were starting to open up. I was coming into myself, basically. And I never talked about the handicap until way later. I was in late 20s, and maybe actually in my 30s. And a music critic in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, was interviewing me and asking me these questions about my past. I was telling him all this, and I kept going, talking about what happened later on in life. And he said, wait, back up, go back to H3. What was that all about? And it was only then that I began to realize of who I was and why I was who I was when I was younger. And why was I shy? Why was I inhibited? And then all of a sudden things started to open up. The world opened up to me. I opened up over time, mostly through the music, because the music was really my first language.
After you had the surgery, you started to play the piano. How did that happen?
My oldest sister was taking piano lessons. So there was a piano in the house. So I would hear it. I'd go to the piano and try to imitate it, figure out what she was doing. Of course, I didn't play what she was playing because she was playing more on an advanced level, mostly popular Broadway songs and music of that nature. But it was very inspiring. And I mean, till this day, I still tell her the story how my father would say, listen to how she plays with her touch. Listen to the touch. It's musical. It's very warm. It's very beautiful. And I was not naturally like that because there was such a disconnect between the fingers and the body. I mean, now at age 61, I'm teaching people you don't play piano from your fingers. They look at me like I'm crazy, but it's true. I say you play piano from your body. All your feelings and everything is in your body. You sing when you play. So everything you sing, you play what you sing, because it's fluid and it's vocal. It has more natural line than the cracks between the keys and the spaces between your fingers.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually realized that the disconnect was because I was not able to hear. And so the fingers, of course, are attached by his joints, everywhere it joints until it reaches your body. So the music came from my body, but I was disconnected. And it took a while until the flow came from the inside out. My teacher used to say, you play from the inside out, not from the outside in. You can't manufacture touch. So everything that you feel is in your fingertips. And it took a while until that connection happened.
Your parents were musically inclined. You have a history of musicianship in your family.
There is. My grandmother's cousin was a pianist, and she was a musicologist. And there was another pianist who came from Russia or Ukraine they came from, he studied in Europe with Leopold Godowsky. And I never met him. He lived in Westchester County, but I had never met him. But I did know my grandmother's cousin, who had sent me to play for Augustin Anievis at Brooklyn College, where I now teach. And he sent me to Adele Marcus. She was his teacher when I was 16. So my father was actually the youngest captain appointed to the New York City Police Department back in the 1970s. And his father was a lieutenant. So no, that's not a musical background, but he appreciated music and he loved music, primarily Rhapsody in Blue, which ended up being one of my core pieces that I traveled with my whole life until finally got to know the 1924 original manuscript in the new critical edition that I recorded. But he loved music, very supportive of me being a pianist, never wavered from that, never did. Although he did once say, get some education credits to fall back on in case you want to teach, because I love choral music. I would have been a high school choir director, but I didn't do it. I didn't listen. I pursued my dreams, which came to be. My mother sang as a child, and in her teen years was taking some lessons, but then she stopped because I don't know if she felt that she had what it took to do that. But she had a beautiful coloratura voice. And so she kind of lived her dreams for herself through me, perhaps. Just what she wanted in music, I guess I was able to help provide for her to feel as though she was part of the world of music.
Your father must have had some sophistication in his listening, because he was describing your sister as having a sensitive touch.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important feedback, and it's an important way, I think, to conceptualize what her talent was. And that seems a step above most people's understanding of music.
Well, yes, because it could have gone the other way, where he'd say, "Pianist, you're not going to make a living," you know. A
Mm-hmm.
police officer. I mean, he wanted to be a lawyer. He went to NYU. It was expensive. He didn't want his parents to be bogged down with that cost. He wanted to be a shop teacher, doing industrial arts. He just didn't go through those things, but he got married young and he went into the police department. He did teach when he was in the army down in Aberdeen Proving Grounds during his time in serving the military, the early 50s during Korean War. Never was sent overseas, but he taught. They had him teaching. So he had that component in him to teach. And being a police officer and climbing the ranks through patrolman, sergeant, lieutenant, captain. Well, he didn't become a lawyer, but in a way, he followed that law enforcement career. And he went back to Queens College in New York to get his bachelor's degree in the 1970s while he was a police officer in political science and minored in music. And, you look back, you say, what did you learn most from your parents? And, I think it's work ethic, respect for others. And to me, that's the most important thing. And no matter what you go into, that you need to apply that. But it could have gone the other way. He could have said, no, I don't think you should do that.
Right.
You're not going to. But they were supportive, followed me right through with it. At that time, it was still trendy. Somebody could actually become a concert pianist and have a career at it.
I think I read somewhere where a relative of yours was involved in Schenkerian analysis.
That was my grandmother's cousin.
Okay.
She taught Schenkerian analysis at Brooklyn College. I believe she went to Juilliard, but then she got her PhD in Columbia University. And she loved the theory of music. I used to see some of her scores, and they had the one chord, the three chord, and all the different things she did. She had a fascination with structure of music, and so she did her dissertation in Schenkerian analysis. Typewritten, I've seen it. It's remarkable, but she could play a lot of chamber music, but she was not, to the one that went out and played with symphony orchestras. But she made a contribution in music that way.
Do you ever use Schenkerian analysis yourself?
No. I understand the theory of music and chords and where they are within the structure of a composition. But for me, music is more of a language of sound, feeling, emotion, this sensitivity to harmony, what a harmony makes you feel like, or how you need to convey that modulation. I look at it more from the standpoint of emotion rather than a Roman numeral.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that they don't feel music or to follow the theory of it, but for me, that's it's good knowledge to have, but it's not for the audience. Doesn't want to know that. They want to know what you feel.
Okay, so you went to Juilliard. When was that?
After high school, I went to the Juilliard School in 1979, did the Bachelor of Music degree and the Master's. And all that time I was a student of Adele Marcus. I started in 10th grade, actually, but she had me studying with the assistant of hers and then with her a bit. And the final year, she prepared me for the audition. And that was an interesting road. I mean, she was 70 and she was a go-to teacher, but a lot of people knew she was very temperamental and lacked the patience for things that maybe a younger teacher would have had patience for. And she was a pupil of Levine and Arthur Schnabel, and she played and she taught. A lot of her students were all competition winners and they were having careers. But she really knew how to handle the piano, to play any instrument to sound as good as you can make it sound. She was big about sound. Her sound was absolutely beautiful. And she used to tell us how her father was 70 years old when she was born, and he was a cantor, a rabbinical cantor, she said. And during lessons, she used to sing very softly, like a cantor, this vibrato, a very emotional sound in her voice. That she was able to translate that to her fingertips. It was remarkable. It was a remarkable sound she got. And I'll never forget that. Never forget that. So great years at Juilliard, stayed in touch with a lot of friends, and we all kind of felt like we were in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. And we were all friends.
So did you stop formal training after Juilliard?
With Adele Marcus, I did. I stopped with her. I was in my mid-20s. It's 10 years at least. And then I just started to build my repertoire and enter some competitions, win some, lose some, develop the repertoire. But even before that, when I was 12 years old, the teacher I had then was Morton Estrin, wonderful American pianist and teacher. And he used to play new music, and he was very good friends with Meyer Kupferman, American composer. And I was 12 years old. He had this big score of a new sonata that Meyer composed called Sonata Mystikos, 1973. He said, I just received this. I don't have time to learn it. Here, you do it. And I did. And then I played it for Meyer Kupferman in his apartment in New York. That was the first time I met a living composer and played a new work by a living composer. I was 12. And that was an important moment. And later on, entering some competitions, you had to learn some new music or old music by living composers. And I remember another pivotal moment was meeting Harold Severud, Norwegian composer. He's 91 years old. I played the Ballad of Revolt that he composed. And after I performed it on stage, I met him backstage. I wish I met him before I played it. He grabbed my arm and he says, and squoze my arm. He says, do you know what those sharp accents are in the left hand? Those chord notes, boom, boom, just like that. What did I know? 20 some odd year old kid. He said those were the gunshots in the war, World War I think he was referring to. What an impact that made on me for a composer to tell me what a quarter note with an accent meant.
Mm-hmm.
And then further into the 1990s, I was venturing into other kinds of music that, I'd get ridiculed for, If you're playing Prokofiev's second and third concerto, Rachmaninoff third concerto, Beethoven, whatever, Leroy Anderson concerto, Rhapsody in Blue, they'll never take you seriously. And it didn't make sense to me. It's music. But I think the fact that I wanted to reach out of the box, the traditional box, was because I did that as a child, looking for other ways to express myself where I couldn't because I couldn't hear or speak. So it was very natural for me to not feel limited at that point. I felt free. So I learned the Leroy Anderson concerto. I performed it. I ended up recording it. Rhapsody in Blue too. There was once I was looking into a management in New York, big one. They're not around now. And I went to meet the agent there who worked for the head of the company. And he said, I told him I was booked to play Rhapsody in Blue with a major orchestra, which was good. And he says, what are they paying you? I told him it was whatever, it's a respectable date and Rhapsody in Blue. He says, well, I wouldn't do it. I said, why not? He says, well, they'll never hire you back to play a major concerto. I said, well, I played Beethoven third with them prior to that. I'll take my chance. I wasn't going to say no. And even then, the Gershwin was not respected. I mean, my gosh, I played the date. And I realized then it was like, when somebody tells you you can't do something, or for whatever reasons they say you can't do something, you have to quickly analyze and see if you feel in sync with that, and that you shouldn't listen to them because they think that it's not good to do for whatever purposes they need to sell an artist or something. I don't live like that. So to me, it was the music that was important. Then I met Lalo Schifrin. I learned his second piano concerto, and he came to hear me play it in Hawaii, and then asked me a few years later to play Beethoven's Fifth Concerto with him in LA. And then we recorded his Concerto of the Americas for a movie soundtrack. Incredible piece of music, but to actually play it for Lalo Schifrin and have him conduct it. I mean, I'm looking back now, saying, that's wow, brilliant musician. This concerto is fabulous. It's almost 45 minutes. It's a biggie, but it absolutely compelling, powerful, beautiful piece. A pianist should be playing it, especially young pianists. And then by the end of the century, I wanted to do something important for music to celebrate the millennium. And what ended up happening was I was playing a festival that Lucas Foss was the head of. And I said to him, I want to start the first big commissioning project, and I wanted to ask Ellen Tafe-Swillig if she would consider being the first composer. Because she was very well known and respected, and a lot of orchestras were playing her music. I knew then, just business-wise, you needed to have a composer that had some cachet, that orchestras would recognize, conductors respected. You could try to build a project. And he provided her information for me. I spoke with her, and she jumped on the train with me on this ride. And I said, I don't know where it's going to go, but let's see. I want to make it the biggest group of orchestras to commission a piano concerto. So we ended up with 27 orchestras, some foundation support, private support. It was the Millennium Fantasy. Premiered with Cincinnati Symphony and then went to all these other states, covered half the country, 25 states with 27 orchestras. And from there, I was bit by the bug. Something told me, you're going to do more of this. So that's when I went to my friend Don Pippin, the conductor, Broadway conductor, Radio City Music Hall conductor. He was terrific. We had actually done the Rhapsody in Blue together a few times. And I said, I want to do something now by a composer of a different genre. So he says, why don't you ask Charles Strauss, who wrote Bye Bye Birdie and Annie, and he was a pupil of Copland, Aaron Copland, and Nadia Boulanger and Arthur Berger. And he had written a piano concerto in the 1950s. And then he wrote a song called Born Too Late, which was a pop song in the 50s. And then came Bye Bye Birdie, and that was his career. He became a popular composer. But I did approach him, and he said, I'd love to do this. So I created the first 50-state project without buy-ins. The orchestras didn't have to pay toward it. I raised his money through a couple of donors. And he wrote Concerto America. And all the orchestras in the country knew about it, was starting to sign up a couple, and Boston Pops agreed to do the premiere in the Honolulu Symphony. It's now the Hawaii Symphony. Was supposed to do the second performance. And then 9/11 happened. And I decided it was just not the right time to venture forth with that. It wasn't the moment to celebrate, so to speak. And so I did the 2 concerts. That was it. Then I went into another project with Lowell Lieberman, his third piano concerto. Pianists out there, you should play this. Such a fabulous concerto. And that's the first project that brought in an orchestra in Europe into an American composer commissioning project. So we had 18 orchestras. Then came more projects with William Bolcom, Richard Daniel, Pork, and Lucas. and Jake Runestad for piano, orchestra, and chorus. Bolcom's also piano, orchestra, and chorus. Christopher Theophanidis, Kenneth Fuchs. Ken's concerto is wonderful. The recording won a Grammy in 2018 for Best Classical Compendium, and more, PDQ Bach even. And then I was playing music by Neil Sedaka and Keith Emerson. Neil's is a nice piece. It's a classical kind of piece. And Keith Emerson's is a very interesting concerto that most classical pianists don't play, but there are a couple out there now. And then just doing more projects of the same. New Planets, that's a project I wanted to do for years, was to do a brand new Planets, but with a certain theme about the pianists going through the solar system with variations of a main theme. And Daniel Pertu took that on. So I've been playing that. And Jim Stevenson concerto, and all these kind of projects just came about, and it wasn't all just classic kind of contemporary serious music. I ended up doing the Monkees concerto, the Peanuts concerto, the Burt Bacharach concerto, just different things that would appeal to different audiences. And now I return to a 50-state project.
Is there someone of the classical canon, the pre-1950 bunch of composers that you particularly admire or like to play, setting aside Gershwin?
Anything and everything. I love playing Bach and Mozart and Liszt and Brahms and Beethoven, all of it. I even played Duke Ellington's concerto from 1945, New World A Comin'. And for me, like Prokofiev 3, I see very differently now than I did studying it. When I studied it, it was, well, that's what students learn. They play it, they perfect it, they perform it, they enter competitions with it. I see it very differently now. I see it, it's a giant tip of the hat to Gershwin, especially the second movement when the piano comes in. Although Gershwin was more inspired by Prokofiev, especially the third concerto, because Rhapsody in Blue starts exactly the same way that the second movement when the piano comes in and the Prokofiev 3 starts. And Prokofiev brought it to Chicago and then to New York. And I think Gershwin must have been there because that trill with the scale going up in the beginning is just way too obvious. But I think the fact that Prokofiev came to the United States and was so inspired by what he saw and what he heard, that third concerto is just very jazzy. It's very different from anything else you would have heard coming out of his pen. And for me, that's such a wonderful concerto because it has so much of that inspiration in it from America, as did Dvorak when he wrote the New World Symphony, between spirituals and all the music of America when he wrote that. And I think the inspiration of composer to composer is so wonderful to see how they feed off each other. So I don't have a typical favorite, but there's a concerto that nobody plays. I have scores to it now by Dana Suisse. She was called the Girl Gershwin. The Symphonic Waltzes, the 8 waltzes for piano and orchestra. It's a gorgeous piece written in the early 1930s. I have the scores now. They've been professionally done. And that piece, I think, needs to get out there. I've got to return to that. I was involved with that. We were looking into seeing how to record it before the pandemic. So I'm going to have to slowly see how I can get back into it. She was an amazing composer. Paul Whiteman loved her. She played the Symphonic Waltzes and Rhapsody in Blue with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra in New York.
Mm-hmm.
The real deal, but fell by the wayside. And again, people didn't cultivate a lot of composers' music for whatever reasons. And now they are, which is good. I think it's good if it's for the right reasons. And it's interesting how it's all evolving.
You've been involved in soundtrack production yourself? Movies?
I did just the piano concerto by Lalo Schifrin for a soundtrack, and they even asked. They said, "What's the biggest piece to play on the piano? Big virtuosic piece." They needed it for a scene in the movie. I said, "The Islam Fantasy by Balak Hiref." So I created a 2.5 minute version of it. It starts at the beginning, and then at one point it goes right to where it reappears at the end, and I take it to the end. But other than that, no, I haven't done more than
Okay.
that. I would have liked to, but no.
Are there particular modern contemporary composers? Is there anybody who really jumps out at you and says, "Oh, wow"?
I can only be biased to the composers that have commissioned new pieces from. They've all been really good. I've been very careful about who I ask to write new concertos, because not just for me and for today's audiences, but also for future pianists and audiences. They will enjoy these pieces as much as I do now. As I mentioned earlier, Kenneth Fuchs's Concerto Spiritualist, based on 3 paintings, is a fabulous concerto. The Planet's Odyssey by Daniel Pertu is wonderful. Jake Runestad's Dreams of the Fallen, piano orchestra and chorus. Powerful, powerful piece. I'm recording it next May with True Concord in Arizona. I always like to keep it going, keep moving forward. Christopher Marshall, based in Florida, said he'd like to write something for me. This was in March of 2021. I said, how about a Thanksgiving concerto? Nobody's done that. And he wrote the Thanksgiving variations. And I said, based on We Gather Together. And he says, I like that idea. So we booked that back in March or April of 2021 for this Thanksgiving weekend. So I'm doing those, and there's a wonderful composer that came out of Iran, Farhad Pupel, and I asked him for something based on Persian heritage for piano, orchestra, and chorus, The Legend of Bijan and Manija. He did that for me, and I'm premiering that in November in Windsor, Canada. There's a mixture of composers that each have such an interesting voice. Jim Stevenson's concerto I just played last month it's an incredible piece of music. It's an incredible piano concerto. It's like the influence of all the Russian composers he loves through an American soul. It's just terrific. It's terrific. And then looking into the future, there's more projects. Adolphus Hailstork is writing a concerto for me that'll be in 2 years. And believe it or not, Melissa Manchester. And Melissa, I got to know through social media. And then she was attending some of my concerts I was doing for a piano camp, Sonata Piano Camp, based in Vermont, which is where I am right now. I'm talking from. And she told me that her father was a bassoonist in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, and she was commenting about my Beethoven sonatas, and I was like, how do you know this? She says, I know the repertoire. And she says, I grew up with this. I stood in the wings listening to all the Metropolitan Opera rehearsals. She knows her stuff. And I listened to some of the music she composed, other than, of course, all the wonderful songs that she recorded over the years. But she has a classical voice. Jimmy Webb is another popular songwriter with a voice. And he was about 70 when he wrote a concerto for me called a Nocturne. It's absolutely beautiful piece of music. The harmonies in there. I mean, Jimmy's a gifted composer, and these harmonies are quite beautiful. So it's a matter of reaching these more popular composers when they hit a certain period in their lives and they return to their roots. It's classical soul searching. It's very interesting. Yes. But I like so many composers, I decided to resurrect the 50 State project now to celebrate actually Rhapsody in Blue, which will be 100 years old in 2024. So I thought, okay, let's go back to 50 states and bring the country together through music. I mean, 9/11 wasn't the time to do a 50 state project, but the way the country is right now with, people's on different sides for different reasons. Okay, that's just the way it is. And, it's not the first time and it won't be the last. But we do celebrate being American. We do share a flag with colors red, white, and blue. And with the Gershwin Centennial, I thought, why not a new Rhapsody? How about a Rhapsody in red, white, and blue? Let's join together. So during the pandemic, I raised all the money that's required to pay Peter to compose the score, Peter Boyer, and the copying costs, whatever it takes. And I thought, rather than asking several orchestras to pitch money in toward it, especially in a post-COVID environment, I kind of thought it wasn't the right thing to do. So I figured I'd take the time and raise the money through foundations and support, and did that. And so now we have about 15 or 16 orchestras on board, but I'm looking to make this the first 50-state project without buy-ins from orchestras to celebrate our country, our unity, celebrate Gershwin, Rhapsody in Blue with the new Rhapsody. And it's a process. Working on it now and hoping for the best. It's tricky. There's a couple of states that don't have as many symphony orchestras as one might think, but it's an unusual project. I'm not limiting it to just one orchestra per state to start, because since no orchestra is paying a fee to be in the project, they don't have to own the state premiere. So we can have more than one orchestra in each state. And it could also be a university orchestra, a college, a university, or a community orchestra. Could be people who want to make music and want to celebrate all of these things I mentioned. So we'll see where it goes.
Wonderful.
Reach for the stars.
Excellent. Excellent. You seem firmly rooted in American classical music. Even within its diversity, you seem focused on American composers. And
yes, with the exception of Farhad Pupel, who's Iranian. Right. He's living in England right now, but that's a totally different kind of sound. The sound of this piece is wonderful. It's better than I ever imagined. And he was worried about it. He said, I can't do this. I said, yeah, you can. Because he sent me piano music. He's a good piano writer. He was also a part-time pharmacist, believe it or not, in Iran. Very brilliant young man. He's in his 30s. It's really, really good piece. We'll see. Premiere will be in Canada. We have a U.S. premiere in February 24 with the Key Chorale in Florida. So I think that's going to pick up some steam. I wanted to build repertoire for piano, orchestra, and chorus because, for the most part, it's the Beethoven choral fantasy that gets played. Bill Bolcom wrote Prometheus for piano, orchestra, and chorus for me, and Jake's Dreams of the Fallen, and now Farhad's Legend. So it is an American movement for the most part. The arranger for the Monkees and Peanuts and Burt Bacharach concerti is Dick Tunney out of Nashville. And Dick has a gift of creating these 3-movement concertos, but with music, various songs or pieces of whatever, the Monkees or whoever, and makes it into a cohesive work. The Peanuts concerto is terrific. That was a big job to do. I had to get contracts with Peanuts Worldwide and with Lee Mendelsohn Film Productions because they own the rights to Vince Guaraldi's music. So that was a process. But everything is a process. And not everybody knows that they hear, the Peanuts concerto. I love that. Charlie Brown Christmas is the 3rd movement. So, you do all these things. Even during the pandemic, I composed one. Actually, I composed solo piano music that morphed into a piano concerto. So I'll be premiering the entire concerto in November with the Space Coast Symphony in Florida, where the Thanksgiving variations of will be with the Peanuts concerto. And I'm not an orchestrator, but one of my students at Brooklyn College, Harrison Scheckler, I asked him, because he's very good at this. He did some remarkable work during the pandemic. And I asked him if he'd orchestrate around the piano part. He said yes, and he did. Did a really good job. So we had some demos of these done with one of my other students, a terrific young pianist, and really good at using Logic's Pro music samples. And he created the audio demo that sounds like the real deal, but took the piano recordings I did and then built the orchestration around it. So it sounds like the real deal. And I wrote the Reflection of Justice first, after Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed. And I played that in concerts, and then it was orchestrated, and I performed it with Dallas Symphony Orchestra last October 2021. And I decided to write two more movements. So the entire concerto is the three reflections: freedom, John F. Kennedy; justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg; equality, Martin Luther King. And we have some videos on YouTube. The Dallas Symphony concert for the Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a video that you could see, but the freedom and equalities audio demos have video montage. I selected a lot of photos, and then Harrison put them together to go with the music. Absolutely. So it's a nice concerto. I mean, it's not like Samuel Barber or anything, but it's really the first one of its kind that pays tribute to three pivotal American figures and core values of being an American: freedom, justice, and equality.
Are you busy enough? Do you find you have enough time to do all that you do?
There's holes. There's lots of space sometimes, but there'll be a dry month or two, and that bothers me. But I'm grateful to have what I have and keep moving forward. I think if we get to 50 states, it's going to be busy, which is I really want to tour this new Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue, and play the Rhapsody in Blue as much as possible with it. Some orchestras say, can you do something else with it? Because we just did the Rhapsody. I go, of course. There's plenty of things. There's one orchestra is looking at the Suite for Flute and Jazz Piano by Claude Bolling, which has an orchestration by Steve Barta around the originals. Claude Bolling gave us permission. He said, you can add orchestra around my original score, but to enhance it, don't change what I have, just add to it. And he loved it. He really loved it. So there's all kinds of different things one can do. I just didn't want to be told no. I remember watching an interview that Marin Alsop did, and I remember she said, when somebody tells me no, I can't do something, or no, I'm gonna take you on. And it's not you don't do things to prove that you could, do something. It's because you're guided by it. I think all these projects are things that are bigger than any one of us. And I always tell composers it's very important. And, they don't take offense at it because I'm very respectful about it. But I always say to them when they ask me questions, because, they want to make sure things are right about things, the commissioning agreements we go through. But I say, listen, I want you to know this is not about me. And that immediately pops the bubble. Because with egos involved with things, it can't be. And you can't have it. It can't be there. There's no room for it. I said, it's not about me. I said, and I'm sorry to say, it's not about you either. It's not even about any one orchestra. This is about what we're doing is with all these projects. And I mean, basically, there's been 23 different pieces over 25 years. It seems like a lot, but if even one or two of them get performed by pianists in 30, 40 years, I'm happy.
Sure.
I won't be here to see it, but it's providing for the future. I mean, look how lucky pianists are. Beethoven wrote 5 concertos. Mozart wrote 20. Wow. I mean, so you want to be able to look back in the year 2075. And as a teacher at the Juilliard School, it's got a little student coming and saying, go back to 2000 to 2030, and there's a lot of repertoire there, So some kid's going to pick up, Lucas Richmond's concerto, or Ken Fuchs's concerto, or the Theophanides concerto, or Jim Stevenson's concerto, or the Pair 2 Planets. There's enough there. There's really enough. I mean, I once said to somebody, I hope I live a long time. I said, if I die tomorrow, the legacy is there. To me, it's about, as you get older, I mean, for me, it's legacy. What am I leaving? Students ask me questions. I go to schools and they'll get up and ask a question like, what advice can you give us as young people? With whatever. And the teachers would say, take your time, it's a real loaded question. And I say, it's not a loaded question, it's a very easy question, it's a very easy answer. And I asked the students if they've watched The Wizard of Oz, and many of them don't raise their hands, but I said, the words I can give you is this: follow your yellow brick road. Because no matter what you do, you're going to find people who have brains, people who have courage, people who have a heart, and you're going to find the wicked witches with the monkeys that are going to try to, push you back and hurt you because they want to get what they want. They want the ruby slippers, so they're going to try to hurt you to get what they want. This is reality. But there's a lot of good out there. I mean, there's also, you get the wizard. You get people who look bigger than they are, and behind the curtain, they have to be careful how much to tell students what to do. You don't want to guide them in a direction that isn't good. But like if somebody enters a competition or they play a certain piece, or you say, maybe you shouldn't do that or whatever, but you don't want to push it because they have to do it. They feel, no, I want to do it. So somebody would say to me, well, why didn't you stop them from playing that piece? Like one girl I know entered a competition, a big major competition, and switched to concerto and played something else, and it just didn't work out for her. And her teacher said she shouldn't have done that. She should have played something else. And I almost said, well, why did you let her do it? But I held back because in my mind, I heard Glinda, the good witch, saying, well, she wouldn't have believed me. She had to learn it for herself. Such a great line. Great line. It's like the line of, parenting. It's like,
right, exactly.
Don't tell them too much, they gotta learn it for themselves. And sometimes, I learned through my own life, there's a lot of things I did maybe I could have done differently, but I had to learn for myself. That's what it is. We're human. But it's an unusual career. I would never think today about pursuing a career as a concert pianist, from the standpoint that the reality of actually having a career at it and making a living is quite a different dynamic now than it was when I went to school 40 years ago. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
There's less of a demand. You have something really compelling to say about a very large repertoire, or maybe look into commissioning new music. I don't know. It's way too. It's not that it's competitive. It's just less opportunity.
Remember, there used to be movies made about concert pianists and conductors, something we wouldn't see today. I guess the most recent one would have been Mozart in the Jungle. But in general, classical music, we don't have the same kind of status that we once did. And because the culture's evolving and changing and values are different. That's okay. The music will continue.
And we're also much further away from the classics. When, the 60s and 70s last century, you were closer to it all.
Yes,
right. You were much closer. Your teachers were studied with a couple of people back with Beethoven, 40, 50 years since then. That's a long time. And it pushes Beethoven and Bach and Brahms further back. But there's still a lot of creativity out there. Now they're finding, avenues for composers that had been neglected for many years.
Right.
So, you find positive ways to keep the ship sailing. And it's not easy, but we do the best we can.
So do you have anything else you wanted to add?
Where we're at now with technology, and back in the 90s, I had this crazy idea of taking the computer and turning it into a global means of sharing classical music. So I created the first classical video live streams from Steinway Hall in New York to start, and then from Amsterdam. And it was a little ahead of its time, but it worked. And it was just an idea to be able to bring classical music to the masses, people who don't go to concert halls, and just bring it to them on their computers. Most of it was dial up, few high speeds, and now, of course, it's much more than it was. But that was the idea back then, is to try to always trying to bring music to the people rather than always trying to get them to come to us.
Exactly.
How can we get us to them? And that's why I created that.
I have to say, I've kept you more than long enough.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
It's been great.
I appreciate their time and inviting me into your world to do this. And, the more we share about what we do, if it's something good for people to the betterment of humanity, it's great. That's the way to keep it going.
Excellent. All right, man.
Thanks a lot.
All right, you take care, Jeffrey.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to Jeffrey Beigel and William Ford of Atlanta Music Critic for that wonderful conversation. Maestro Biegel has had an illustrious career and continues to be a major advocate for new and sometimes overlooked music. Remember that AtlantaMusicCritic.com is the place to experience and enjoy in-depth conversations related to classical music, and from time to time, original music, film reviews, and venue tours. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications below to ensure you don't miss anything from Atlanta Music Critic. Become a supporter of this unique channel. Join at www.patreon.com/Atlanta Music Critic. Finally, if you would like to suggest someone to be interviewed, make a comment below. This is Laird. I'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.